and all of you wonderful, lovely people. I see we've got individuals in from Sweden. I think I saw some people from Berlin. That's right now. We've got people from Liverpool, all over Europe, and I want to welcome you to tonight's session. It's a blistery, windy, wet day outside. What can you expect? It's London. But today I've got a very special guest joining us for a few reasons, and one of them is I've just discovered he's just finished a 15-year game. A 15-year game. That's absolutely insane. I see we've got people from Edmonton, we've got people from South Africa, we've got people from Connecticut, Belgium, or Denmark. Look at that. Absolutely lovely. Canada, if you don't want snow, I'll come and visit you and the snow will go away. I've been trying to chase the snow from Japan all the way across and I still haven't got any damn snow. Anyway, all right, it's lovely to see all of you here from all over the world, and hopefully we're going to have fun. So I've got a wonderful guest in today. He's going to talk about role-playing. He's going to answer your Q&A questions, as well as a Kickstarter that has been on this channel for quite some time. He'll answer any questions that you might have. So let me get him to join us. I am speaking about none other than Darren from World Spinner, which has produced Portrait Workshop. Darren, how are you doing?
Doing well, and thanks so much for having me. Good to see all of you.
Absolute pleasure. Really glad to have you on the show. Now, Darren, well, firstly, if you don't know who Darren is, he is the mastermind genius behind Portrait Workshop, that amazing package that you will be able to have access to fairly certain. Well, I say fairly certain. I'm being very optimistic. Darren, tell us a little bit, just a little bit about Portrait Workshop, what we can expect from it and when we can expect it to come out. Because the Kickstarter is nearly done. You've got 9 hours to go.
Yeah, we're just about there. Yeah, it's great timing to be here on the final day of the Kickstarter. I thought this would be a great opportunity to let anyone had questions they wanted to ask in person, chat with us live here. Kickstarter's been running for 4 weeks now. We've just, as of 2 hours ago, unlocked the very last stretch goal in the entire Kickstarter. So every single thing that we wanted to do is going to happen. We even have 2 stretch goals we added during the Kickstarter. So even bigger than we were originally planning for it to be. And in a nutshell, for those who don't know, Portrait Workshop is a new tool. We are finishing it up using the funding of this Kickstarter to fund a large amount of custom artwork, which is really at the core of the project. And it is a really easy way to make a high quality, very, very customized character portrait for a fantasy character. In terms of timing, as you're asking, with the Kickstarter ending, we will be sleeping tonight, and then next week diving in and really getting the groundwork laid for a very large pile of artwork. That's going to take us a few months. The beta will be available to backers starting in May, and then the goal is to have the project complete by August and start making it available to people who were not part of the Kickstarter. But there's still a few hours to get in on the Kickstarter if you haven't, and there are definitely some special benefits for being a backer.
Gosh, okay, yes, there we go. So, firstly, Adrian, 1976, stuck at work. Just stop me to say hi. Well, hi and hello, and thank you for that donation. Really do appreciate it. We'll grab a cup of coffee and think about you stuck at work. And 501st Legion Gaming, 501st all the way, as they say. And yeah, can't stay for the stream. That's okay. Thanks for the like, nonetheless. Okay, so we've got... yeah, we've got Darren here. We're talking about Portrait Workshop. There are already some questions coming through. I'll answer your questions shortly. If you are new to the stream, please put the word question in caps in front of your question, and then it will stand out and I can read it. You can see on the stream there we've already got John the Wise and White Tiger 225 asking questions. So we'll jump into those in a little bit. Now, another reason why Portrait Workshop is so close to our hearts here on the channel is that we are releasing our Nautical Campaigns book, and we're using Portrait Workshop in that book. So before the program's even out, Darren and his team got together and they made a whole bunch of portraits for it. Now, when I say a whole bunch, I think they made nearly 50 separate portraits just for the book. I've got, courtesy of our wonderful layout artist down in Brighton in the UK, Martin has sent through a very rough layout. Now, we are going to change some things up here, so it's just so you can have a look. But this is what we will be using Portrait Workshop for in the book. So this is a page from the book itself. And you can see at the bottom the wonderful, wonderful, wonderful portraits that were generated in Portrait Workshop. So those are not, it's not the final layout, how we're going to use it, but that's something that we're going to be doing moving forward. So each of the adventures have got portraits and things made in Portrait Workshop by Darren and his team. Now, Darren, there's some questions coming through here, and I think that just to give it some context, it's not that we've just brought you on the show because of Portrait Workshop. That's definitely a very exciting space to be in. But you've also run a 15-year campaign. Now, folks, listen to this. It finished a couple of years ago, 2 years ago or so, you say.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
it spanned 15 years. And you say your final adventure, you planned it 13 years ago. Is that right?
Yeah, or perhaps the penultimate adventure. As is usually the case, it's very hard to predict where players are going to go. So there was this finale set piece encounter I had set up from the very beginning. By the time it played out, of course, a lot of details were different, but it was still immensely satisfying to have something I'd had in my head for over a decade finally actually come true. Although, as it turned out, not with the same set of players that originally it was written for.
Well, I think it's absolutely brilliant. So if there's anyone more qualified to answer your questions tonight, I don't know who is. So let's jump into the questions. John the Wise says, will there be any cyberpunk characters in Portrait Workshop?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we've had a lot of interest in cyberpunk. Absolutely. I think the best answer I can say is that the Artificer pack will have quite a bit of very steampunk looking stuff. Actually, my apologies. Steampunk or cyberpunk? I may have misheard that. Cyberpunk. My apologies. I went to the other punk. So I would love to say yes, but what I can say instead is probably in the future. We purposely kept this campaign very focused on the fantasy realm, and we originally looked at a whole lot of things. A face is a face, regardless if it's World War II or the Middle Ages or cyberpunk, to some degree. But we really wanted to do one genre, do it really well. And so we focused on fantasy. Going forward, given the success of the Kickstarter and the level of enthusiasm that we've seen, we are very interested to address other genres. Cyberpunk, absolutely. Sci-fi in general. Steampunk, as I accidentally started with. And even historical. There's a lot that we can do here. And as we did in the Kickstarter campaign, we'll be reaching out to our users or our potential users and finding out, what do you want? Because the whole point of this tool is to make something that actually works for people.
Right. Lovely. Okay. White Tiger 225 says, my players are dead set on tracking down an illithid and their elder brain once and for all. And they hate the enemies who hate enemies who flee in the face of defeat. But despite knowing everything humanly possible to know of the illithid, they have done nothing to prevent their plane shift ability. What do I do? What would you do? Do you know much about illithids, Darren?
A bit. They didn't actually feature in my last campaign. They weren't part of my world setting, but I mean, they're still a pretty canonical race. Definitely they've left quite a legacy.
Absolutely.
And that is the challenge. You can come up with the best plan possible, and your players are either too damn smart for your own good and figure out how to defeat the entire dungeon in 15 minutes, which is what happened when they used proceeds from their last adventure to hire a gang of 200 Viking mercenaries to go just wipe out an entire dungeon I'd set up at one point. Or they don't figure out some of the most basic things, which is super frustrating. I think in that case, my response is either show them the error of their ways and have it really demonstrated in the most explicit way you can without a party wipe, what happens. Or if they really need a bit more nudging, often finding a non-player character who can act as the voice of reason and point them to something that you think is obvious, but for whatever reason they don't, is often the best way to do it without having to break out of the end character.
couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely. You've got an NPC on the channel. We call them mentors. Literally, the party could have a side quest or a side adventure where they are rescuing an NPC who tells them that, they were defeated by the fact that the lids jumped and plane shifted, and if they'd only stopped them from doing that, they could have. You can really lay it on thick if the players are just not missing it, or have an illicit escape through that means, and say, well, you could have stopped them, but you sort of really haven't. So there you are. Another question: the Ten Sheet Tobias says, ever GM'd or played Shadowrun, or any plans to do so? And if you've got the experience, any hints to chain runs together? Have you ever done Shadowrun?
I have to say I haven't, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I haven't.
I'm actually about to start. Sorry,
carry on.
I'm about to start a Expanse campaign. Not the same thing at all, but a break from my usual fantasy worlds. But no, I've never done Shadowrun as much as I'd love to.
I haven't done Shadowrun either. I've done a lot of near future kind of stuff, and from what I hear about Shadowrun, obviously it's all about breaking in and hacking into the systems and those kinds of things. So yes, if anyone else has played Shadowrun, give Tenshi Tobias some insight as to how to chain runs together. Of course, the idea is that if you leave a trail of breadcrumbs, they can follow. That might very well help. Eric Eziel says, that sounds awesome. I think this is towards the portrait workshop. Allows me think of a... Oh, it makes him think of a super grown-up Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head system for producing unique portraits. Is that accurate?
That's actually a brilliant analogy. It's the first time I've heard somebody other than me say it. One of my early concepts for it, I called it Mr. Potato Monster. And the idea was you could take the wings from one creature and the snout from another and the fangs from a third and the horns from a fourth, and put together all sorts of both things that are in the books or things that are in your own head. That is absolutely one of the things we will be supporting with this, but bring it to a more PC focused type of environment. The same thing holds true with less extreme pieces. So again, this hairstyle, that nose, those ears, and so on. So it's a pretty good analogy, but we do go quite a bit deeper. And just one example of that is the outfit that you dress your character in, which is often such a big part of revealing their personality. You don't pick an outfit and bam, there it is, and here's the color scheme. You can. That's the quick way to do it. But an outfit is 5 layers. Up to 5 layers. What's the undergarment? What's the main garment? What are you wearing on top of that? What's sitting on your shoulders? And those can stack in a whole bunch of different ways, and they can be colored in a whole bunch of different ways. So, with the face, with the garment, with what weapons you're carrying, you can really get a degree of customization that I honestly don't believe exists anywhere else. And yeah, it's Mr. Potato Monster.
There you go. Trust a player to kind of nail right into the core of it. Derb for Gale says, is there any chance of amphibian races with the beastmen like frog folk?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question, and definitely one of the biggest stretches for us. We've even stretched the project during the course of the campaign. Of course, there are a near infinite number of races. We would like to be able to do every single one. We did add a few over the course of the campaign as we got a lot of requests, and we found some clever ways to make them fit. I will say, in general, the idea with Beastmen mostly is to take pieces and put them onto a human face. So you can do a werewolf who's starting to get a bit shaggy. He's got the fangs coming on. He's got the furry ears going on. But once you start taking it all the way into a completely different 3D geometry, the pieces don't fit anymore. You can't take Mr. Potato Head and put a nose on that's twice the size of Mr. Potato Head's nose area. So because of that, the less human-looking races, we will be doing more expansions for in the future, we expect. And that includes Minotaurs, which is probably our single remaining biggest ask that we haven't been able to accommodate, mouse people, and amphibians. So I think those are all great opportunities for the future.
Awesome. Awesome, absolutely awesome. So yeah, Minotaurs are really, really, really cool. I'm
Mm-hmm.
randomly picking up questions here. There's so many of them coming through, and I'm picking questions for you, Darren, from Portrait Workshop, and then also for you guys in general. Fuzigius says, "What is the biggest challenge in playing on Cipher system for players and GM?" Now, the Cipher system, I'm trying to recall. The Cipher system, that's Savage Worlds, is it Savage Worlds? Just elaborate a little bit on that, Fruz, please, so that we can come up to it. I actually thought you were talking the Coda system, which was a wonderful system that developed by Decipher many years ago. So the Cipher, have you heard of the Cipher system, Darren?
Not actually familiar with that one.
Yeah. You see, the problem is, I think the older you get, the older role players have less systems under their belt. I don't know. I mean, I tend to find that it's like, well, we've been playing Dungeons and Dragons since the dragon was a hatchling, so we've not been exposed necessarily. I'm not sure. Okay. Ian Gee says, how to transition from first to, and then it goes. Let me come back to that. How to transition from first to second adventure in a campaign. The first one felt like it's just exposition, i.e. the big bad, the NPCs, etc. I got a week left to prep the next session. Darren, how did you string together? You had 15 years of game. How did you string from one to the next adventure?
Sure.
Did you have a mechanic that you used, or what was your process?
Well, there's a few things I did, and everyone has their own style. I don't think there's any one right or any one. Well, there probably are a few wrong ways to do it, I can imagine, but there's an awful lot of right ways to do it. You've already started the game. It may or may not be something you've done or have time for. I always like to talk about session 0, which is talk to your party. What do they want to do? You know, if you've got a bunch of people that really are satisfied by defeating powerful foes, and that's what drives them, you know, having 4 politically oriented espionage quests in a row may not be something that's going to bring it back to the table. So find out what people want to do. I also like to say, figure out, do you want to go for a longer term arc? Or are you doing a series of completely disconnected adventures? Both valid styles. In my case, I had a big arc. I mean, as I said, I planned out where we were planning to go years from now, at least in very, very broad terms, and then was building things towards it. But overall, in either event, a theme is really important. So in our case, it was the party had really said they wanted to explore the theme of a world that had just gone through some bad times. Undead were really common. And it was sort of this trying to rebuild civilization from the Dark Ages kind of environment. And so some of the first adventures took that theme people had asked for and built on it from a very, very small scale, dealing with an angry farmer who it turns out was poisoning the river unwittingly, and constantly moving it forward to larger scales that tied into some of those bigger goals.
I couldn't agree more. And I think also, you know, when you're looking at how the adventures work, you mentioned very briefly a couple different things there, so I'm going to go back a little bit. You were talking about whether it's one long-term campaign or whether it's episodic, sort of each adventure doesn't necessarily link to the next one and so on. So the idea is, once you've established, yes, I'm going to have a lot of different adventures and they're not necessarily linked together, there is nothing wrong with that. They might, however, feel like there's not a huge amount of depth to the campaign, but there is also nothing wrong with actually doing that initially, seeing what your players like, kind of going, okay, they really like the combat more than maybe the politics type of adventures and things, and then bringing in threads of a big bad enemy, a bigger idea as the campaign has grown and as the players have developed and things. So you can certainly do that as well, I think.
Absolutely.
Never be afraid to listen to the players after the game. What are they talking about? Are they talking about in the first adventure, like, oh, it was so cool when we did this, we did that, and we did the next thing? Give them more of that, not too much more, but give them more in a different way. So if they were talking about the combat, give them more combat. But yes, linking them together can be tricky.
And I find it very satisfying as a DM and my players, at least for my group, I suspect this is common, tend to find it satisfying, is to peel back the layers of the onion, and there's something interesting as you go deeper. So in this case, the very, very first thing was somebody's poisoning the river. It's a cow farm. What's going on up there? As they started getting deeper and deeper into it, they discovered that the real source for the poison was actually necromantic. It took them 4 years to get to the bottom of that particular one and discover what was actually happening behind all this. But so it gave them something where they felt like they were making progress towards this bigger understanding, but you still have to keep each session interesting. As you said at the beginning of this, pure exposition, if you do that more than about once or twice in a row, you may start having attendance problems.
Absolutely. If you jump onto our YouTube channel, you'll see there we talk about the 4 different adventure types, which are designed to help you to keep it flexible. You've got the thwarting adventure, which is where they're going to go and stop something from happening. You have the discovery adventure, which sounds like the one that you've already had, where they're learning something new, they're uncovering a truth, or they're discovering something. You've then got a collection adventure where they are going somewhere, they get there, they collect it, and then they have to collect the object, so it's going to go and retrieve something. And then you have a delivery adventure where they have to take something from somewhere and take it to somewhere else. So by running those 4 different adventures, if you make sure that each adventure, one after the other, is a different type, then you're also creating interest. So it's not just thwart. You want to try and chop it up and change it. All right. Lance Pickett says, should clerics and the like be expected to do daily devotions? If so, what is your opinion, and how would you suggest to implement it? Clerics have changed quite dramatically over the course of the many years of gaming. You were playing 3rd edition and then 3.5. Did your clerics have to do a daily devotion? Did they have to say to you, my cleric goes off and does their prayers or something? Did they need to do that?
Yeah, and I mean, dating myself, but I mean, I started back, 1st edition, and it's changed even since that. And then some other systems where it behaves differently. To me, the most important thing with the cleric is I'm never interested in playing purely for mechanics. You shouldn't be playing a character because he's got the best stats, or even if that's a motivation. You should be playing the cleric as a cleric. So one of the recent trends I've seen that I'm not terribly fond of is, I have a cleric who doesn't have a deity, doesn't have a particular creed. He's got this series of abilities, and what he believes in is himself. That's not a cleric. I'm sure people will disagree. How they express that, I think, is much more interesting if it's not uniform. Some clerics have one set of behaviors that are radically different from another. That's part of what makes them interesting. So daily devotion, great. I think it's an interesting thing to do. The last couple major clerics in my campaign didn't do that, but one of them had a vow that a quarter of all his earnings went to the poor, and that was the tithe that he put in. Another cleric had some very specific rules about who he could and could not perform certain services for. And I even had one character that was a cleric who wrote himself out of the campaign because his deity did not believe that resurrection was a good act. He believed it was an act of necromancy. And he followed that rigorously, truthfully. Was a really great character up until he ejected himself effectively from the game at about 7th level. So there's a lot of ways to do it. No, I don't think any one of them is right or wrong, as long as it feels like your character is drawing power from some higher source. And is maintaining an interesting role play.
I agree. I think also something to add to that is that if you are going to enforce devotions and things, if the player isn't doing it out of role-playing space, if they just don't do it, and you want to encourage them to do it and that sort of thing, there used to be an old-fashioned sort of, I say old-fashioned, but there used to be an older approach where the characters started to lose their abilities because they weren't showing the proper respect to their deities. Paladins would also be affected. That can work, but then at the same time, I feel that you should then also be encouraging the warrior to talk about at the campfire them repairing their armor and sharpening their swords. The wizards are going to go off to go and learn their spells and that sort of thing. So really, all of the classes do have a downtime activity, if you like. So encourage your players to do that. And one of the ways is to say, how are you doing your daily devotions this evening, player of cleric? Describe for me the process, that the ritual that you're going through, and yes, let me know what it's all about. Or fighter, how are you sharpening your swords? Do you have a whetstone, for example? All these kinds of things I think we kind of want them to do on their own, but sometimes they don't necessarily know that they should.
And I'll interject just very briefly. A really fun player-driven episode in the game that I've done is when a cleric realizes they're not well aligned to their deity. and they are either kind of pushed to or choose to change deities. And that act of changing teams when you're a cleric can be a very profound one. That can set up a really interesting adventure, even adventure chain in itself. And again, if you view it as you would say, give your character the choice to have more options, not to have to be living within one box that they don't like for a long period of time. It's fun, I think, when characters occasionally have adventures that are all about them, not about the big bad from outside forcing somebody to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also a great way if the player is playing a cleric and they're not happy with the way the cleric's going, you can have this almost this divine moment where the character does change because they realign, and you can then let the player also tweak things to that character, so it's more in terms of what they were hoping for, rather than having the character leave the campaign or die off. So there's some options for you there, for you to go through. AK Writer says, maybe it's because it's Sunday evening, but I don't understand the difference between the advanced and the advanced party pack besides the prize. Could you explain that to me? I'm going to go to the let me go here. I'm now on the Kickstarter page. So what is he talking about there, Darren?
Yeah, if you scroll down about halfway down to the rewards section, will be a graphic, and just keep going a bit. We're getting there, and I'll let you know as soon as we reach it. The page has grown a bit there we go, as we tried to answer questions and explain more. So I'd love to say the difference is the party pack adds better music and more booze, but that's not what it actually does. It's actually quite simple. The advanced reward gives one person the app, so they can make as many characters as they want with it. The advanced party pack gives 5 people the reward, so they can all make as many characters as they want with it. It's a group discount. If you think that other people at your gaming table would also like this, or other people overseas or wherever would like this, it's a way to get 5 copies for the price of 3, which is just a much better deal than having to buy them individually.
Absolutely. Okay, so there we go. There's your answer. And yeah, AK Writer, hopefully it'll work for you. I was describing the software to my housemates here, and they were saying, can you do this? Can you do that? And for me, one of the big things is that the standees option. I know I've been hounding you for it for a while. I think there's a picture on the Kickstarter somewhere. I'm going to see if I can find it. But the idea of being able to sort of almost generate an entire village worth of people, I think is really, really, really powerful and really, really cool. So while I look for that, let's answer some more questions. How are we doing for time? We're in half an hour. Yeah. Okay. So we're doing okay. Gabriel Stevens says, any advice on historical campaign settings without breaking history? Interesting one. Have you ever run a historical campaign?
I've done campaigns that have been very historically motivated, that would often kind of parallel the events of history. It's a very common trope in fantasy, for that matter. The groups that I play with tend to lean a little more towards high fantasy. So if there's no possibility of there being spells and dragons, for this group, it's not as interesting. I will say, though, one observation I would have, you want to base a historical game around things people know, being in the aftermath of some big battle or on the edge of something that actually happened. But if you're trying to not break history, as you say, you can't give them too pivotal a role, because if they actually have the chance to change how Agincourt turns out, history is pretty broken at that point.
Yeah, and Shakespeare's got nothing to write about. You're right on the money. I was about to say, something that I have done where we've done sort of World War II type of spy espionage things. What you do is you set the players up, at least the adventure up for their characters, to support major historical moments. So the Battle of Agincourt, Henry V's great battle against the French. If you look at that, you go, okay, well, the major factor that helped win that war was the fog and the French overconfidence. So what could the players be doing if they're on Henry's side? Perhaps they could be sent out to look for the right field to find, which gives them conflict with a few French knights, which causes the knights to be overconfident. There's various options and things. So Battle of Thermopylae, where you've got the Spartans versus the Great Persian army. Again, the players could be sent ahead to find that pass or to secure that pass, or to help the Athenian fleet go and do that. So there's lots of options where by supporting the historical events, the historical events are happening, but the players are still feeling as if they're part of it. And then if they start to edge towards changing history, there's nothing wrong with having other groups of NPC adventurers who are going to actually do the deed, kind of getting a hold of them and saying back off, or they meet in a corridor. So there's ways and means, but it can be a lot of fun. As you said also, though, your players need to be prepared for going into a game where there isn't magic, there isn't going to be amazing healing, supernatural healing, unless you're going to go with something like that. You're going to go more of a Hollywood history where the characters are beaten up one moment, they have a romantic moment with the nurse, and then the next day they're absolutely fine. You can certainly do that too.
Yeah.
Let's see.
And you were looking for the Steam.
Yeah, I found them. They're
great. I was looking up as well. Number 11.
Yeah, I've got them. I'll show you guys just now as we get there. Catherine Bischoff says, I have a Knoll monk NPC who wanders the world in search of an end to the hunger that curses his people. He appears with cryptic clues to the players, dating floundering moments or in downtimes. Don't see the question there. Do you think having a mysterious NPC who appears in moments of party floundering to deliver cryptic clues or to share cryptic hints of his own is too obvious a DM asset? Is it too heavy-handed to have this individual come in? Do you think, Darren?
As with so many things, it's probably how it's played. I think it's a really fun idea.
Exactly.
I mean, I'd much rather have this cryptic creature show up periodically, and especially if there's clear motivation behind it, drop clues and opportunities, and that's far better than the DM breaking character just dumping them on you. You could overdo it pretty easily too. If this constantly happens, if they feel like this is just a thinly veiled hand of the DM telling them what to do, that would be too much. I think it's a great idea. I would just say don't overuse it.
Yes, I would also say it's easy enough in sort of films and books and things to have this mysterious character appear, give them a few lines of dialogue, and then mysteriously vanish again. In role playing, the players can have their characters just run after the person, saying, "Stop! Don't you bugger off! Why are you leaving?" So it's important to understand the entire story of what this character is doing and why the character is being cryptic. Why are they purposefully giving cryptic clues? Why not just be open and honest about it and say, hey, there's a curse, I need you to break the curse. So when being cryptic, it should be for a reason. Perhaps they've been forbidden by their leadership to talk about the curse. So they're going to try and guide the characters in certain directions. Because what that will allow you to do, once you've figured out why the character has to be cryptic or why the character needs to be temporary rather than on a more permanent basis, it will help you in terms of the dialogue. Because the character, if the character appears and the players wrap rope around this character, they're not going to flee. The characters have the potential to then interrogate. And if they're going to do that, you need to know why this person's not answering their questions so that they can answer in such a way that doesn't give away the whole game, but it also says, look, I can't actually answer you. I've been sworn to a vow of silence, or whatever. I mean, yeah. But yes, it does depend on how you play it. It really does. And
as you said, a really common Hollywood trope that I personally can't stand is purposeful withholding of information for dramatic tension, when it would have far better served the person to just tell the person that. You don't give a cryptic hint about how to defeat the enemy. If you can just tell them, oh yeah, push that red button over there, and they'll be defeated. So if it's being cryptic, why is it being cryptic? As you said, I think is very much at the core of it.
Correct. There was a wonderful, wonderful episode. It's fairly topical at the moment. Star Trek Picard is out right now. I haven't seen it, so no spoilers, please. But the original Star Trek Picard, known as The Next Generation, I think it's in season 5, or I want to say 6, but I think it was earlier on. I think it's even season 5. There's an episode where Romulan Admiral defects, Aladar Jarok. He defects to the Federation. Now, he has all these Romulan secrets. And he knows one major thing: the Romulans are building a secret base, and he wants it to be stopped because he thinks it's going to lead to a war with the Federation, which he doesn't want. So he goes to the Federation and he says, there is the base. And then the Federation starts saying, well, give us codes, give us more information about your people. And he refuses based on the fact that he's not betraying his people. He thinks that the activity of building the base is wrong, and he wants the Federation to stop it. But he doesn't think the rest of the Empire is wrong. So he had very strong guidelines in terms of what he would and what he wouldn't answer. So I think it's a good opportunity to go and watch some Star Trek and see how you can do that in a way that kind of makes sense. Christian List says, how do you generally handle police involvement in a crime? The PCs are supposed to handle or solve or get away without involving the police, I think, without portraying the law enforcement as dumb and incompetent. Yeah, that's the old trick of the policeman not knowing what's going on. Every police officer in every Sherlock Holmes novel ever. There was one, I think it was Detective Gregson, who was the only one that was ever slightly better, but they were usually always a little bit silly. So, did you have any police in your game that the characters had to work around, or sheriffs and guards?
Yeah, I've done that once or twice. I find incompetence, as you say, you can get away with that once maybe, but if the police in this world are truly that incompetent, why are they still there? Why would they get salaries? Another pretty overused, but at least I find more plausible, is corruption. The classic one is, sure, the police are entirely capable of solving this. They just don't want to. They're being paid not to, or other reasons. They're actually the ones who did it. Who knows? So you do need to find a reason why the police aren't involved. That actually makes some kind of sense.
There's that. Another trick that I have used in the past as well is that the police are simply overworked. And so they look at it and they go, wow, you handle this. You can look into it, but we'll get to it eventually once you've given up, and then we'll solve it, something along those lines. Right. Another example is that the police actually trust them. If you look at Jessica Fletcher from Murder, She Wrote, that TV series from the 90s, I think it was. There she was running around. Again, if I was the police, I would have arrested her long ago. But anyway, she was there and she was doing her thing. And the police kind of respected that she had an uncanny knack for it. That didn't mean that they were going to stop doing their own thing. And remember, all it takes for someone to miss a clue and then go off on the wrong tangent is also viable. So the police aren't incompetent necessarily. They just went in a different direction. Right. And it's useful to be able to use the police as sounding boards to get the players on track if they've got lost. The police can call them and say, well, we've discovered this and that. What do you have? What have you discovered? And hopefully the players, if they haven't got anything, they'll go, oh, all right, well, we found this out or we found that out. So that can be really, really powerful too. Darren, did you want to add something on that?
Oh, yeah, I was going to say the other one that I find this ties into that actually goes strangely unanswered in a lot of campaigns is, what is the distribution of power in the world? In other words, if you're a party of 6-level adventurers, is that a dime a dozen? Are there one of those per 10,000 person city? Just how common are these, extraordinarily powerful sorts? And if it's not common for there to be a 6-level adventurer in a small village, then you have a great opportunity, which is the police have the authority, the police have the connections, they have the local knowledge, they have the trust. But there may not be anyone in the police force that can cast a 4th-level spell to help resolve, an issue. And so they may bring a skill set that just isn't present because it's so rare. So that's an interesting direction to go that I think does sort of take the mechanics of the game into account.
Absolutely. Another good example is something like The Flash, where the police are simply, it's not that they don't have the skill set, it's just that they have absolutely no idea what's going on because it's so metaphysical or out of this world that there is no, the man disappeared. That's as far as we can go. Meanwhile, they turned invisible or they flew away, something along those lines. So it's a good question. Grendel Mratz asks, this is a question for Darren. Will goblins or other unlisted races eventually come to Portrait Workshop? Let me show you those standees while you talk about that.
Sure. Goblins will. Actually, goblins will be in the release, happy to say, as well as hobgoblins and a number of other humanoid races. So we do absolutely have those. If you go far enough, obviously we in version 1 won't have everything you possibly could have, but our goal is to have a lot of pieces that you can use to build things. And again, which version of goblins? There's certainly plenty of different portrayals. So not only should you be able to do goblins, but you can decide, do your goblins have green skin, or do they have reddish skin, or grayish, and what do their ears look like, and are they bald? Because there's a lot of ways to portray goblins. So towards the end, actually, at the very end of the page, for that matter, Guy, you'll see there's a chart which is not comprehensive, but which attempts to answer the question of, if you're playing this character, how would you build it? And you'll notice, for example, there we show goblins as something that the Beastman pack enables. In general, I would say, if you do want to play goblins or other humanoids, you definitely want the advanced version. There's a lot more content in there that will go beyond, again, it's kind of the most basic fantasy races.
There you go. There you go. It does everything, folks. It really does do everything.
Not quite everything, but we're a lot more than it would have before the Kickstarter. That's for sure.
There we go. There we go. Mr. Face Rock says, I'm running a mystery campaign and my players are missing some crucial details, even though I've left breadcrumb trails for them a few times. They will indeed do that. I've done an entire series of videos called Running Mysteries, How to Run a Crime, How to Run a Murder, which talks about you should be giving every single clue should have 5 clues linked to it. So if it's a bloody knife, you should have blood on the walls, blood on the knife. You should have the knife. You should have a knife box where the knife is missing. You should have a trophy for knife throwing being owned by the murderer. And then ultimately someone should say knife. We suspect a knife was used. So 5 clues per 1 clue that you're giving out. So it can feel laborious, and you can go, the players are going to get it on the foot. Not necessarily. It does sound like, though, you've already run this and the players are trying to pick up pieces. So there is nothing wrong, again, with having a private detective show up saying, well, I know you all are working on the case. I've been working too in the shadows. I thought we could compare notes. Now, I got this one. What have you got? Let's share. Let's do this. Let's do that. Now, if you were to just have him come in for that scene, you would be guilty of being a very poor GM, because you are literally hand-holding them. You need that detective to come back later on and try and kill the party because he realized they were on the right track, and so he wants to get the reward and those kinds of things. So yeah, but just bear that in mind now that it's kind of going. Let's see. James Tension says, any tips for coming up with original PC character ideas? We're starting a new campaign and my inspiration well feels dry. How do you come up
I have
with
a suggestion. I think we actually mentioned this a little bit on my last visit. I mean, one of them, this is going to sound very, very self-centered, but make portraits. Spin up a random portrait. Probably most of them will catch your eye, but then you'll see one that says, oh, this guy looks interesting. What's his story? And sometimes the visual can be a tip to that. So I think that's one way to do it. Another thing I would strongly suggest, one of the best sessions I've ever sat in on at a con was Orson Scott Card talking about character creation and how to make an interesting character. And his comment was, you always want to figure out what's their obvious surface level motive, and then what's below that runs counter to it. And if there isn't a second level, by definition, it's a one-dimensional character. And if there isn't some opposition, then there's not as much depth and tension. So, what purpose is this person trying to achieve? And then what would be something that would impede or complicate that purpose that makes them more interesting? That's one mechanism I think that works really well.
Absolutely. I've just typed into chat for hopefully everybody to see, where I've taken your name, James Tension, and I've turned it into this individual known as Jimos Tushan. And then I've just asked the question, who is Jimos Tushan? What does that inspire? Jimos Tushan, is that the name of a sorcerer? Is it the name of a warrior? Is it a name of a cleric? Is it a name of a... What is that? Who is that person? Jimos, is that a female name? Is it a male name? Is it something else? Tushan, is that a warrior's name? What's the origin of that surname? So that's an entirely valid process to go. Find a portrait. Again, look for those motivations, as Darren was talking about. I think there's lots of routes to take. Each one may inspire something. Darren?
Yeah, another one I'd mentioned that works best if you've been playing for a while, which I've certainly absolutely found works in some cases. Look back to players that have been in your campaign or in my previous campaign, and either draw something that's kind of inspired by that, or one of the favorite things I've done is I've taken characters who have since been retired. In some cases, the player has been retired, and reintroduced them as a non-player character. And if you've played 20 sessions with this person, you've got a really deep knowledge of how they tick, how they would respond, and there's some autonomy in that person, even in your own mind. And whether or not the people at the table know the previous character, I find that still tends to give them something a lot more meaty to respond to.
Yes, indeed. We are nearly out of time. We've got 11 minutes left. We're going to work through some of these questions here. Michael Beale says, any advice for starting a long-running game for a new player? It's a weekly solo game with others joining occasionally. I love solo games. They allow for such in-depth character development. It's really, really cool. And the character really can become the hero of the story. If you've got others joining in and out, that's absolutely fine. For starting a long-running game with a new player, I would, if it's a new player, take them in slow. Don't start them in the middle of this gigantic political upheaval. If that is the opener, have them escape out into a small village where they can then start to learn the process and what needs to happen and what needs to be done. That would be my advice. Darren, anything off the top of your head for a new player and a long campaign?
Well, I think the other one, which in this case is critically important, if it's focused on one player, as you say, with others that pop in and out, really be damn sure you understand what motivates that one player. It's tough in a large group. Somebody wants to do hack and slash. Somebody else wants to do inventing new types of magic. How do you balance that? If there's one person and they really want to do something and you're not aware of it, or you're not, delivering it, you're not set up for success. So that is an advantage in your case. If you haven't already, make sure you know what makes them tick.
Correct. Lovely advice. Watcher2417 says, how much gold is enough gold as a reward, and what do you do when your players have too much gold? My advice off the top of my head would be get your players to buy property. If you've ever owned property in real life or in a game, you will know that is where all the gold will go. In a game, you get them, you give them a small tower. Maybe a local lord sees that they've got lots of money and goes, I'll give you this fabulous tower. Steel, really. It won't cost you anything, actually. I'll provide you all the staff, and occasionally I might ask you for a loan or some money. And then, of course, we learn that he's ripping them off for all of the food costs and those sort of things. And then they want to expand that. So I usually kind of go that way. Darren, what do you, how much gold is too much gold? I mean, that's how long is a piece of string?
I'm kind of a notoriously stingy DM. One of the things I personally hold pretty dear is if everyone's got a +3 magic sword they're waving around, it's not special. And if your character is defined more by their list of possessions than by their skills and by who they are, then it becomes a very mechanical game. So I very rarely have this problem, to be honest. But exactly what you said is when you get to a certain point, if you have enough money that it's becoming an issue, you have enough money, it's attracting a lot of attention, and other people will help solve that problem for you.
There we go. Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. If you do steal gold from the players, which is definitely something to do, bear in mind the players will try and track that person down, and they're going to need definitely a big reason as to why they stole it. Well, it's a lot of money. I mean, I had to steal it. I didn't have a choice. If they're working for somebody else, it can be a wonderful hook to get them into a longer plot line where there's this big criminal mastermind who's realized the players are powerful and rich, and so is after them personally. You can build it into all kinds of wonderful things. things. So yes, definitely something to look at. Macklin7541 says, just pledged to the Kickstarter. Can't wait to use the app. Well, Macklin, thank you for that.
Thank you.
There we go. Jason Theriot, or Therio, I assume, I'm not sure. Please remember to put the word question in front of your question. He says, I will be running my very first session in a couple weeks. That's fantastic. I'll be running Pathfinder 2nd edition, but I've watched so many of yours and Matt Colville's channels on being a good DM. Any pointers? Pathfinder 2. Have you looked at Pathfinder 2, Darren?
I actually haven't. So I'm probably the wrong person to answer any mechanical questions on that, although I think there's a lot in common, regardless of the system when running your first game.
Oh, yes. So, yeah, Jason, I mean, Matt's videos are fantastic. And the storytelling aspect is always going to stay the same. That's why we do what we do on our channel. We don't talk mechanics, we do talk story. However, having said that, I have also played Pathfinder 2 when it was in the alpha release stage. I played it with someone who's very knowledgeable about Pathfinder, good friend of mine. And I have to say that the numbers get very big. Not what you expect, having come from maybe sort of 5th edition, something along those lines. The numbers get very big, but don't let them get daunting. Don't be terrified by a character who's got plus 20 or plus 30 to some skill challenge check or another. So do bear that in mind. Focus on the story, get the story right. The mechanics will fall into place. Someone else was asking, and I don't see it now. I'm gonna maybe break a little rule that I normally have, but I'm going to come to it. I don't know what the person's name was, but they were saying, how do you learn a system very quickly? I think the easy answer to that is that you really don't learn it very, very quickly. But understanding the core mechanic. Now, what they've been very good at in the recent past is trying to have that core mechanic run all the way through, without many additional mechanics on top of that. So, I mean, if we look back to 1st edition or advanced Dungeons and Dragons, 2nd edition Dungeons and Dragons, there were a whole lot of different mechanics that were in play. The old percentile system for rogues picking locks, and for warriors' strength, saving throws with percentile values, which was a whole different system to how the basic combat kind of thing worked. Thaco was introduced, which was an inversion of the system. So those have all been refined down. In Pathfinder 2, the core mechanic is roll a die and hit the target number, or hit the armor class, and add your stats onto it. So that's the long and short of it. The rest is just finesse and detailing and minutia, which I think you pick up over time. A lot of GMs, I think, get very intimidated by having to know everything before you start. I certainly wouldn't do that. I would also advise your players to read the rule books so that you can work collectively together, and you go, we need a call for how to jump off a waterfall and how much damage would you take. Is it no longer 1d6, or is it no longer this or no longer that? It doesn't matter. I mean, it's sit around the table, figure it out, and make a call straight there, and then move on from that. Okay. Next question. How are we doing for time? We've got 4 minutes. Victor Ocasio says, how will the app adjust art assets so they fit such a wide range of body sizes and races? It's a very technical question, but long and short, Darren, how will we fit bits together?
Right. So there's a lot behind the scenes in the app, and I could spend an hour going into that, but I can't. The key thing, though, is for any of the standard humanoid bodies, we have certain ranges that we do scaling. We adjust things to make them fit, is kind of the long and short of it. But this goes to the point I mentioned at the beginning, which is there is a limit to what we can do with that. So again, you can't take a truly feline head, take the muzzle from that, and put it onto an elf head. It's completely inappropriate. It won't fit. So the rule that we used in building the app is to say, stylistic choices are up to you. You can make some really weird concepts of what a dark elf looks like. That's up to you. That's fine. We try to prevent drawing errors. We don't want to put something where the lips stick out off the edge of the head. That doesn't help. And so the app will kind of hold your hand and prevent you from picking combinations that will just flat out break.
There we go. Kael McGurk Kajail McGurk says, new GM, awesome. How do I transition from Fendorf goblins to fight for the fate of the island nation? How do you make it feel natural? It's a matter of time and adventures. I think you slowly step your adventures up bigger and bigger as they go. Yeah, moving towards ultimately getting that feel, you know, fight for the fate of the nation. Oh, a very classic example is that the local chiefs and tribes and things don't trust them. And so they have to earn that trust by going on little adventures, and slowly over time you can get to that point where they then allow them to do some major things about that. Some short fire questions. We've got 2 minutes left. Simon Melishitz has been asking this question for a while. How would you play a demon who tries to hinder one party member to make him crumble and sell his soul, and without sucking out the fun from this player and making him feel targeted? Is it demons who make? I thought it was devils who make deals for souls. It could also be demons. I'm not sure. Do you know, Darren? I should know. I did Descent into Avernus just the other day.
I'm probably the wrong person to answer that.
Okay, so yeah, in terms of that, Simon, it's about making sure that those attacks are infrequent, and there should be some benefits that that player gets as well from the demon, giving them some powers in exchange for the corruption, that sort of thing. Last question: are there plans for getting the app onto Apple products? I think it's definitely going to happen already.
Yeah, it will be from day one. It will be on both iOS and Android.
There we go.
Oh, and also just to clarify too, by Apple products, some people mean like a laptop. There is a system that Apple is working on to allow iOS apps to run on a laptop or a desktop. So we're hopeful that that'll work, but I'm stopping short of saying that that is a solution until we actually see it and test it.
There we go. Okay, so guys, that brings us to the end of today's show. There are still questions coming through. If you didn't get your question answered today, I will see you all next week, Sunday, same time, same channel, where I'll be answering those questions. So if you didn't get your question answered today, just join us again next week, same time. Darren, thank you so much for joining us today on Workshop. You've got, let's see, how much time is left? You've got
9 hours to go.
Yeah, 8 hours here, but I suppose we're an hour and I don't know. 8 hours to go. So we wish you the very best of luck. You'll be seeing more of Portrait Workshop on the How to Be a Great GM channel. And yeah, much love from.
And I'll be diving into the comments section. So if you do have questions, if you have any questions you need answers to in the next 9 hours, just ask me direct. I will literally be at my keyboard the minute we hang up here.
There we go. So if you do have questions, jump onto the Kickstarter and you can ask them there. We will be raiding. For those of you who are on Twitch, we will be raiding World Anvil. Their show is about to start, so I will initiate the raid there. For those of you who are on YouTube, I wish you a fantastic evening. As always, I hope that you have the very, very, very best of Sunday evenings, afternoons, days. Darren, I wish you the best of luck for your Kickstarter. And yeah, once again, thanks for being on the show.
It's been a pleasure as always.